It's time to discuss what the UFC should do to improve their business. That's right. I'm basically going to treat this as my pitch to Dana White, or my ideas. I'm going to treat this as if I run into Dana White in Vegas. Now, I know Dana White would say, "Hey, what's up, kid? Good kid, yeah." He would brush past me. He would talk to the Nelk boys and everyone else that's popping in the room. This is what I would do if I were to stand on business. I would hold my ground. I'd square up with Dana White. I'd look the man in the eye, and I'd freaking tell him what's what. I'd tell him this is what needs to be done. Okay? Because there's a lot of things that I believe the UFC can do to improve their business. Some of this has to do with the plumbing and very basic things. Some other things would be big fixes. All right? So I'm going to treat this as, this is what I would bring up to Dana White if I were to get a 1-hour meeting with him. Okay? So the first thing that I think would be really beneficial for the UFC is earlier start times for all fight cards. Now, I say all fight cards. I take that back. I love what the UFC does with the UK cards. I love what they do with the Saudi Arabia cards, where they're on at a reasonable time. And when they're all said and done, I live on the East Coast in the US. It's like 6 p.m. and I get to make my content and I still have energy. They just announced a Manchester card. And I think this is the first time they're doing this, or at least since Michael Bisping fought Dan Henderson, I believe. The Manchester card in the UK is going to start at a normal time. The main card starts at 10 p.m. Eastern, which is 3 a.m. for people in the UK. How is that supposed to grow the sport? I mean, listen, you basically have a whole continent that you're alienating because you have the fights on at such a late time. Again, there's this idea of, okay, well, do we want the people that are working on Saturdays in the US or Canada or whatever to be able to catch the prelims? Or do we want an entire continent to be able to watch at a reasonable time? I think that they should prioritize the continent over, the few people that are going to be working on Saturdays, which is a lot. There's a lot of people that are working on Saturdays. But even if we're talking about a regular US pay-per-view, why is it beneficial to have these pay-per-views start so fucking late? I know there's this idea that, dude, everyone's free at 10 p.m. on Saturday. No one's working at that time. Sure, but you're right. People are free, but they're still going to go to bed at a reasonable time. I know people that will refuse to watch these big fights that I hype up to them. These are casuals that I'm talking about. And I'll hype up fights to them, and they're just not willing to stay up. They're not willing to stay up until 1 a.m. for a main event in the UFC. Especially when there's like a 6-fight main card, or maybe the co-main event was 5 rounds and it was a stinker or whatever. I mean, I've had experiences where I'm watching boxing cards. Like this past weekend, I was watching Devin Haney versus Ryan Garcia. And I was fighting back the urge to fall asleep during the co-main event. And I was considering just basically calling it a night. I was like, this is ridiculous. It's taking forever. Like, I just wanted to watch this big fight between Haney and Garcia, and I'm basically falling asleep. Before the 7th round, where Ryan Garcia starts tuning up Devin Haney, I'm actually, sleeping, falling in and out of it. Thank goodness Ryan Garcia started knocking him down and making it entertaining, but I just think they're on too late, okay? These cards, if they're in the US, and it's a big pay-per-view, I get it. You want to start it later on in the day because there are still people that are working on Saturday. Start the main card at 9 p.m. I know it's just a 1-hour difference. It makes a difference. It does make a difference, okay? If you're going to the UK, cater to the UK fans, all right? And I understand that there's this idea that, they're trying to cater to the US fans. I just said the US fans are already being turned off because of these late fucking starting times. And to make it worse, you have late starting times for fight nights that are headlined by, no disrespect, but Shamil the Blob Gaziev should not be fighting at 1 a.m. Okay? You should not be falling asleep during the feature fight of a week fight night. I remember I was literally falling asleep, and I hate to admit this. This is actually kind of embarrassing, but I was actually falling asleep during round 1 of Jeff Neal and Vicente Luque when that fight happened a while ago. And I woke myself up when there was a big moment, and I was able to catch the war that was on, but that was only the feature fight. And it wasn't because I wasn't interested in the fight. I was hyped for the fight, but I was exhausted. It was like 11 p.m. and there were 2 fights to go. The Mexico card that they put on about a couple of months ago, the feature fight was on, and it was basically 2 a.m. It's ridiculous. Okay? Like, I think it's probably more of a detriment to where you're destroying the sleep of the UK fans and the European fans and people in that side of the world just so that you can cater to the American fans, but the American fans are still struggling to stay up. You get my point? All right? Make them earlier. Have it so that the UK card doesn't start at 3 a.m. for Europeans or people in the UK, but it starts at 2 a.m. for them. It starts at 9 p.m. for us East Coasters. Like, I'm literally considering moving for this reason alone. Like, this is not the only reason, but I'm actually considering moving to the West just so that the fight time of these cards is better for me. So, yeah, I just think that's what they should do. Start the cards earlier. My ideal time for the fight nights is like 4 p.m. is when the prelims start and the main card starts at 7. That would be great for pay-per-views too. That's ideal. I don't think anyone wants to stay up till 1 a.m. Like, yeah, don't get me wrong. It's nice staying up late sometimes, but still, does anyone really care if it's an hour earlier? No. Like, it helps a lot more than it would hurt us, okay? So that's my first rant. Start these cards earlier. We don't need to stay up till midnight to watch a WMMA co-main event on a pay-per-view and fall asleep during that. You know, it's turning people off. As I said, I've had the same experience watching boxing where I'm falling asleep during a boxing fight or a Bellator co-main event. I'll stay up to watch a Yoel Romero Bellator fight, and it's midnight, and it's not even the main event. It's like the co-main event, and I'm already asleep by the time it's starting. Enough. They're lucky that there are hardcore fans that just make it a habit and are always hyped up for these big fights, that they're always going to watch it and be awake during those fights. But a lot of casuals that you're trying to convert, they're not fucking with this. Okay? Number 2, allow content creators to sparingly use fight footage. Now, this is one of the most important things that I want to talk about. If you're a content creator, you'll know what I'm talking about. You cannot use UFC fight footage because it's copyrighted. And I understand the UFC doesn't want people posting their fights because they want people to watch their fights on UFC Fight Pass, ESPN Plus, the people that they have deals with, and they want them to tune in live. They don't want it to be so easy to watch everyone fighting. I get it. Okay? But for content, I have MMA Guru on screen, I have The Weasel on screen, and I have Mixed Martial Academic on screen. Mixed Martial Academic makes a lot of these documentaries. And I've actually talked to him in my live stream about this. It's really frustrating because if you allow content creators to use, let's say, 5 seconds of fight footage here and there when they're making their point. Let's say I'm talking about the low kicks of Jonathan Martinez and how nasty they are. And I want to show people footage of him low kick TKOing someone. Just 5 seconds. That goes a long way. It pulls people in a lot more than just showing a body kick photo of Jonathan Martinez because I can't find a fucking low kick photo of the guy on Google, right? If you allow someone that makes documentaries to every once in a while show a little bit of fight footage, it just adds so much more to the viewing experience. And I've even seen in my most viral videos, I happen to use a little bit of it. Now, of course, you know, the UFC takes notice and it makes me not want to use that anymore because, again, it's like, well, I can still have a really good video that won't get as many views. It'll still get views, but at least I'll get paid for it, right? You want content creators to feel incentivized to make these really good videos where a photo doesn't always do it justice. And I understand that you can't just let people go crazy and use as much footage as possible, but my suggestion is for videos that are less than 10 minutes long, allow someone like The Weasel that does these fight breakdowns, allow him 1 minute of leeway where you can split up footage. Maybe the rule is you can only use 5 seconds or 6 seconds max, and you have to split them up a little bit, but you can overall use 1 minute of footage. Or for videos that are 10 minutes or longer, 2 to 3 minutes of footage. Let's say it's a 20-minute video. You can get away with over the course of it there being 2 minutes of footage. Because again, this is the difference for example, Mixed Martial Academic. This is the difference between 400,000 views where he has to dig and search his hardest to find the right image, or sometimes we have to resort to using pad footage. We have to find fighters hitting pads to make a point about their boxing, when I just really want to pull up a Piotr Jan combination against Uriah Faber, knocking him down in a fight. That's the difference between 400,000 views on a 30-minute video and 1 million views. Just because if you're able to add a little bit of snippet of footage every now and then when you're making a good point, that makes a big difference. And I feel like if MMA content creators are allowed to have a little bit of leeway with this, and of course I'm an MMA content creator, so there's obviously an incentive for me to make this argument, but hear me out. If you allow content creators to have a little bit of leeway with this, their videos will go more viral. As I just said, it's the difference between 300,000 views for a big channel and 1 million. If that guy gets 1 million views consistently, that's gonna grow the sport, okay? Because casual fans are often converted on YouTube. I started watching MMA because I would stumble upon clips of, this is when I became a hardcore fan. I would stumble upon clips of Joe Rogan talking about Yoel Romero with Joey Diaz, talking about Ogun and stuff like that. And then I would look up Yoel Romero on YouTube and I'd find like a documentary or a video about him. If these videos go viral, more casual fans will be converted. And I think that it goes a long way. I think it really goes a long way. If you have more people making content on MMA, more people that are incentivized to make content on MMA, the sport will grow, okay? And for the UFC, you gotta have a line. You can't just let someone use 2 minutes of fight footage in a 3-minute video. Like, obviously that's not gonna be good for them. And you can't have anyone posting fights, but that's just a suggestion that I have. Like, there are people that post highlights on TikTok that go viral, but you can't do that on YouTube. Well, I mean, you can't really do it on YouTube during a documentary, but you should be able to, just a little bit, in my opinion. But yeah, that's just my argument. Let me know what you guys think about that in the comments. The next thing that I have to talk about: new reporters at press conferences and an incentive to ask fun questions. So here's the guy with the pink suit that asked Conor McGregor a ballsy question. He was not one of these reporters that just sucks up to every fighter and kisses their ass and wants to brown nose them and make eye contact with them and rub shoulders and no water cooler talk, okay? We need new reporters, and at the very least, an incentive to ask fun questions. No more, how does it feel to be here? No more, hey, what would it be like to be the star of the show this weekend, man? None of that. The point of asking a question at a press conference is to rile up the fans or to create dialogue between the fighters. Doesn't always have to be beef, but it could be funny dialogue or, just create big moments. This is not a time to ask a question that you would ask in a one-on-one interview in an intimate setting. No, you have thousands of people behind you. Hype them the fuck up, okay? This guy asked Conor McGregor, hey, you haven't won since 2016. And, this guy sent you to the Shadow Realm last time. Why do you think you're going to beat this dude? Great question, okay? Because it got Conor McGregor to show that response, all right? You can't have people asking jittery questions and freezing in their boots. If they ask a bad question, then they should be in some way, shape, or form told about it and punished. Now, when I say punished, I don't mean you put a trap door underneath them and you press a button and there's freaking alligators under there. I don't mean you put a bear in the crowd, even though that's what I suggested. Maybe, there's a place where the reporters are, and if they ask a bad question, you let a bear loose. No. What I mean is go up to them if you're a higher up in the UFC and tell them, hey, dude, you're not getting the point of this. You're supposed to hype up the fans. You're supposed to get these fighters to talk amongst themselves. You're not supposed to ask how it feels to be here, okay? And you're not supposed to ask Dana White, hey, you thinking about going back to Canada? I know we're in Miami and you haven't even announced a Canada card, but kind of talk us through the thought process of that. Don't be doing that bullshit. Hype up the fight card right here and now. Tell them that. And if they fuck up again, then they get the boot. Meaning they can still cover the events, but they can't be one that asks a question at a press conference. All right? And let fans ask questions. Allow fans to ask stuff, because what's the worst thing that they're going to say? I mean, I could think of a few bad things that they're going to say. Fair enough. But, at the same time, you got to have people like the pink suit guy ask questions at press conferences, or people like me. People like me. The point of it is to create fun moments, hype moments, to get the fighters to trash talk, not to ask them how they're doing. Because, again, that's a liability to the card. It makes people want to tune off the video. It does not hype up the card. You're supposed to sell it. It's the time to sell the pay-per-view. All right? And they're turning people off. They're liabilities. Let's get on to the next one. Let fighters have more freedom on walkouts. Here's a photo of Michael Venom Page wearing his Undertaker outfit, where he came out doing this dance and all that to this cool music. But a lot of people like the walkout. It could have been way better. If you heard what Michael Venom Page had to say a couple days after, he said that his plan was to have his twin brother appear in the middle of the octagon as the lights shut off and they shut back on, and then Michael Venom Page teleports in the octagon, they shut off, he's gone, and then you go back to Michael Venom Page. The UFC said no to all that shit, right? They said no, you can't be that creative. You're going to waste time. The UFC has this thing where they got to have every fighter do the same old thing, have the same boring ass walkout. And yeah, you can dance on your walkout, and yeah, you can hang out with your team and all that, but if the fighters go to the UFC and they come up with a plan that's not over the top and it fits in a certain amount of time and it doesn't take 10 minutes long, if it can fit in the amount of time that's perfect for a walkout, or they can go a little bit over, like 30 seconds over, let them do it. Let these guys show off their personality a little bit more, because most walkouts are just kind of boring. But it's really cool when we see guys put a little bit of their own personality into it, like Alex Pereira and the bow and arrow and the scream and all that. And his walking, his menacing walk to the cage like this. And then you have guys like Johnny Walker, right? But allow them to get a little bit more creative with it. The fans like that stuff, okay? And what's the harm? People have already bought the pay-per-view. They've already waited up until midnight. You think an extra 30 seconds on a walkout is going to ruin it all? I don't think so, okay? As long as it's not too long. And also, I've also noticed that the UFC is no longer showing walkouts for prelim fighters. And they used to. I don't remember when they were doing it, but I do remember they used to show people walking out for the prelims. But now they want to show more ads, and I get that. They want to have their ads running. I totally understand, but I think it kind of ruins things a little bit. Like, I want to see Yuri Prohaska walk out to fight Alexander Rakic because Yuri's an intense guy. He always has a good walkout. Maybe him and Rakic are going to have a stare down, but the first I see of them in the cage is when Bruce Buffer's announcing them. And now, right? We don't get to see a sick stare down between the two. And there's a lot of prelim fights on stacked cards, or even cards that aren't that stacked on a regular pay-per-view, where there might be a bit of a beef going on. And I want to see the intensity of the fighters before they actually get announced by Buffer. All right? Start showing the prelim walkouts again. Okay? And then if you don't want to cut the ads, then dude, cut some bullshit. Cut the Minty Bets segment that she's not bringing any freaking revenue in. What's she doing for the sport, right? You can get rid of some of those people. On to the next one. No more tough. Cut the Ultimate Fighter off. We don't watch it. All right? If Conor McGregor can't retain viewers throughout the whole season, what makes you think that Valentina Shevchenko and Alexa Grasso are? It's outdated. The HD reality TV just doesn't work. It's not raw. It's not gritty. All right? Who wants to go on it anyway? I mean, the best fighters in the world that are outside of the UFC don't want to put up in a reality TV house amongst a bunch of other failed prospects that are just trying to get their 15 minutes of fame. And by the way, if you're trying to get your 15 minutes of fame on The Ultimate Fighter, you're cooked. Like, you don't understand how to get famous anyway, because no one's fucking watching. So, like, how old are you to think that reality TV is going to be the big thing? They just need to get rid of it, okay? No one's going to watch. It doesn't work. It's not interesting, and no one wants to put up with that house for a month where they can't even contact their family and they have to be all secretive for no reason, as if anyone really cares about the results of The Ultimate Fighter. All right? Whatever money they spend on The Ultimate Fighter, spend it on the Dana White Contender Series. Hype up the fighters even more, okay? Make it an even bigger deal. Turn it into like a bigger promotion where you have more fans and people really want to tune in, where it's not just a chill night at the Apex, okay? Just hype it up more. Incentivize more MMA fighters from around the world to want to go on it. So that way you can actually turn people into bigger stars when they win on it, okay? That's my suggestion. You may even be able to increase the bonus a little bit. Go with a little bit of a higher bonus. Whatever money you wouldn't be spending on The Ultimate Fighter, put it into the extra bonus money for the Dana White Contender Series, if they even do bonuses. I kind of forget if they do that, but that's my suggestion. Higher fighter pay. We got to pay these guys millions, okay? I think that the fighters should be paid millions as soon as they enter the UFC because you're a pro athlete. I'm kidding. This is actually a tough one. Now, here's the thing about fighter pay. Of course, increasing fighter pay means the UFC as a business needs to pay the fighters more, but it's not that simple. I think that it could go a long way as far as optics go. It's a really good look for the company that's been seen as a bit stingy. There's always talk about fighter pay, and people are constantly bitching about it. And some people think that the fighters should get paid millions each, and that's just insane. That shouldn't be the case. I mean, you have to really earn your keep. I'm talking about an extra couple of thousand for the beginners. I'm talking about a $15,000 a show turns into a $17,000 a show, something small. And of course, it's important to make a profit. And I just don't think that the UFC would be missing out on a profit if they just bumped it up a tiny bit. A small start, and also cut other things out. Stop paying for the Ultimate Fighter TV show, okay? Like, you don't need to have minty bets or, this random person that talks for 5 seconds at the side of the octagon or whatever. Like, there's so many things that the UFC has that are totally irrelevant. There is something to be said about some of these guys just don't generate any money for the UFC. If you're just a new guy to the UFC and you don't even have a particularly fun fight style and you don't have a big personality, you shouldn't be getting paid $100,000. First of all, it's not even nearly as hard to make it to the UFC as it is with some of these other sports where people get paid a lot more. There's a lot more competition to get into the MLB. There's more competition to get into the NBA. And so they'll get paid more, okay, because the stakes are higher, right? But if I density max my way to heavyweight and I beat up someone that's on the regional scene that's just also a fat flyweight and I get to the UFC, I don't really deserve millions of dollars, right? Something very small goes a long way. It's a good look. And for the heavier weight classes, a little bit of an increased fighter pay will incentivize more people to get into MMA, because you got to think about it. No one wants to get knocked the fuck out for $15,000 on live TV. All right. Now, I'm not saying $15,000 isn't anything, but you have to pay your coach, right? You have to pay taxes and all this stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just not enough to get more people into the sport sometimes. And there's a reason why the heavier weight classes in MMA are so dog shit. Because it's like, well, why wouldn't they just go into football or basketball or baseball? Now, I understand a couple extra thousand for the first fighter contract and, $3 extra $1,000 for someone that's on their second fighter contract isn't going to make a huge difference. But once people start catching notice of it, that the UFC is increasing the pay a little bit, then you get better athletes. You get more people that are going to think about MMA. And I just think that, with better athletes, we would have better fights and more people would be interested. So again, you got to take a small jump at it, but the UFC also needs to be the biggest promotion on the planet. And the thing is, if they do pay the fighters too much, like let's say you're someone that's ranked, but you're a fun fighter, the fans love you. If the UFC is paying you millions of dollars a year, you may only fight once every year and a half, right? But if the UFC pays you $300,000 a year, then you're going to want to fight a lot more often. All right. Just because you're going to want to get more paydays. Right. And that's just how it is. As they always say, if you're waking up in silk sheets, you're not going to want to fight. So unless they are the biggest stars in the sport and they're really earning that and they're generating tons of revenue, it's one thing. Okay. But I guess the point that I'm trying to make is, a little bit of extra pay might incentivize more people to get into the sport. And, it'll just make a big difference as far as the public perception is involved with the UFC as well. But of course, you can't go too crazy with it because then, well, we're not going to get all the greatest fights that we all want to see, which is one of the good things about the UFC is they put on the best fights. They have the best fighters in the world fight often. And I guarantee you, if they were making $40 million each, then they wouldn't be fighting all the time, obviously. New matchmakers. I have a photo of Aljamain Sterling and Movsar Evloev in their quote where they're trying to call each other out. That's a perfect fight. I have a photo of Juliana Pena and Kayla Harrison on screen as well. Perfect fight. I think they should have made Kayla Harrison versus Juliana Pena for UFC 300. Holly Holm isn't going to talk any smack. She's 40 years old. She's the sweetest woman in the world. Why not have the trash-talking, loudmouth, vibrant Juliana Pena? Even though people think she's cringy, at least they're not lukewarm about her. At least they're not, indifferent. Why not have her fight Kayla Harrison, who's also brash, loudmouth, trash talker? She's not the biggest trash talker, but you get my point. All right? She likes to trash talk a little bit. That's what I'm talking about. I feel like the UFC matchmakers, now trust me, sometimes they do a great job because they've been doing it for a minute, but you got to have young guns in there. You got to have a person like me in the mix that knows, wait a second, there's some trash talk. There's a little bit of a beef here. What if two prelims guys have beef? What if two guys that aren't even in the rankings have a beef going on? The UFC may not even notice that. Someone like me might, and I might pair them up in a fight. Aljamain Sterling fought Calvin Kattar. it ended up being okay, but you know what would have been better? Aljo versus Brian Ortega, Aljo versus Movsar Evloev, and I hope the UFC makes this fight because two amazing grapplers going at it with decent stand-up skills. They got to make the best matchups and maximize them all the time because that ultimately is the most important thing to create a good card. When I was critiquing UFC 300, I was complaining because, you know, I wasn't that upset that there wasn't a McGregor versus Brock Lesnar matchup or a Michael Jordan versus LeBron James one-on-one on the main card. I don't give a fuck about that stuff. I didn't need some foolery on it, okay? All I needed was good, solid, stylistic matchups. Aljo versus Ortega would have been better than Aljo versus Calvin Kattar. Kayla Harrison versus Juliana Pena would have been more competitive and a more fun build-up for the press conference where they're going to sell it and talk some shit, okay? And I also think that, for example, you could have had, I don't know, maybe a Giga Chikadze versus a Josh Emmett fight on there instead of Marina Rodriguez versus Jessica Andrade. Just something like that where you know it's going to be a banger every time. You know there's going to be an action-packed moment there. That's what I think that they should focus on a lot more. And I just know that sometimes these matchmakers, they're a little old. Maybe they've been friends with Dana for like 20 years and they might not be as in tune with the sport as they used to be. And they end up making really random matchups sometimes. Like it'll be a Kelvin Gastelum versus a Mari Akhmadov fight rather than a Calvin Kattar versus Yair Rodriguez. I don't know. You get my point. You always have to maximize the best matches possible. You got to have some young guys in the mix that are hardcore fans, that aren't getting a little bit lazy with it, that are really tuning into the sport and understand, you know, what the fans really want to see, what could create a good beef and a back and forth. Next up, tournaments for weaker fighters. Weaker fighters. Speaking of the flyweight division, tournaments for weak divisions. I have a photo of Steve Ercik, and we're talking about tournaments for weak divisions. They are weaker in the flyweight division, but let's be honest, guys. That flyweight division, if Steve Ercik isn't fighting for the belt, it's going to be another trilogy. It's going to be another rematch, and we need something to spice it up. And I think that a tournament would really be ideal for that. Okay, just marketing it, just having like a bracket being posted on the UFC's page, and you know sometimes they have fight nights that are dog shit and the pay-per-views aren't stacked enough. I say just make a whole fight night for flyweight. Do a whole tournament fight night where you have 4 flyweight fights on the main card and, you know, a couple decent prelim fights. And that way you get to stack the pay-per-view a little bit more with, you know, the middleweights or the welterweights to make it somewhat interesting. And then you have someone win in the first round of the tournament and then it's getting hyped up. They're moving on to the next semifinal or whatever. I think that they should do that, okay? Because it would at least create some sort of interest, more interest than there already is, because some of these divisions are very weak. And it's really only the flyweight division, in my opinion, which is fun. They have fun fights, but there's just too many rematches, right? And there's not enough beef going around because Manel Cap keeps pulling out of his fights. You got to have tournaments for the bantamweight women's division too, because it's really just Kayla Harrison and Juliana Pena and no one else. Just do something like this to make it more interesting. And that's it. We're getting on to an old slide. What Islam Makhachev needs to do to become the GOAT. That is it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think in the comments. These are some suggestions that I have for how the UFC can improve their business. Let me know if you agree or if you disagree. Until next time.